Hello, everybody, and welcome back to 8 Minute Methodism. I am your regular commentator, Dr. J, because I don't want to give you my whole name. It's 27 letters long again. But today I have a guest whose name is also very long and has some extra punctuation in it. With us today is Dr. Philip Wingai Araya. I know him because he was my undergrad and graduate theology and missions and a couple other things professor. And then later on, we became colleagues. I even taught for him at a seminary that he served with. And then we ended up wandering around London one day looking at Methodist historical sites. And now he's asked me to talk with him about his new book, John Wesley and the Origin of Methodist Missions, which, y'all, this is a great book. It's a great book to read all the way through or to pick out pieces you find interesting based on a country you're interested in, a person you're interested in, and just go deeper with that person. But first, I'm gonna let Phil talk about himself and talk about his book a little bit. Then we have some questions we're going to talk about. So I'll give it to Phil now.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for having me on the show. I have been a fan and I've watched former videos of 8 Minute Methodism, so it's a joy to be introduced to your audience. Well, a little bit about myself. I am an MK, meaning a missionary kid. My parents were missionaries in Singapore, and I was born there. But growing up, I never imagined that I would get into missions and mission work. But God had other plans. And so when I finished my studies, I was commissioned as a missionary and served in Latin America, in Nicaragua, in Cuba, in Mexico, and along the US southern border in South Texas. And after that, I got into teaching. And like you mentioned, I taught at different universities and seminaries and teach mission studies as well as all things Methodism. So it's a joy to be on your show.
Thank you. Thank you. And what do you do now?
Right now, I am the Executive Director of Education for the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry of the United Methodist Church.
That sounds like an awesome job. I know it keeps you traveling too. We're being able to schedule in between your trips to the Southern Hemisphere, so that's exciting. I want you to just go ahead and share a little bit about the inspiration behind this book to start with and what led you to write this book.
Well, when I was a missionary in Cuba, I didn't know a whole lot about John Wesley and our Methodist heritage. And the church there was experiencing a revival, and the church was growing, and the church was experiencing a charismatic renewal. And so I wanted to learn more about our DNA. And so one day I wandered into the library at the seminary and I pulled out the works of Wesley and I started reading Wesley's diary and his journal. And I started to see that a lot of these same things that I was seeing happened in his ministry in England. And so I just got interested in Methodist history, in missions, and how the Methodist Church spread. And so I started writing about it, researching it. And sometimes I'd go and present at conferences, sometimes I'd lecture in classes. And so I started collecting those lectures. And this became the beginning of what turned out to be this book. The big step forward was in 2023 when I received a sabbatical and a fellowship in Manchester, England. And there I was able to go to the John Rylands Library, where they hold all of Thomas Coke's original letters. As you know, and your audience knows, Thomas Coke, along with Francis Asbury, were the two first American Methodist bishops. And so I read all of his correspondence and all the ways that he spread missions and sent missionaries around the world. So that's really the origins of the book.
Thank you, thank you. And one of the realities I think with a lot of Methodist studies courses is we focus so much on Asbury, we forget that Coke was not just the first Methodist bishop in North America. He was a just diehard missionary his whole career, it feels like, locally and around the world. I mean, as you write in the book, he died on his way to another mission site. So, like, that was his passion. He died on mission. Uh, Wanting to spread the gospel, wanting to care about other people and be in that place.
Yeah, Coke was the father of Methodist missions.
Yes.
In fact, the book is entitled John Wesley and the Origins of Methodist Missions, but it really could be entitled Thomas Coke and the
Mm-hmm.
Origins of Methodist Missions, because at first, John Wesley was reluctant to send missionaries. Methodism just spread with ordinary, everyday lay people who got on a ship and traveled somewhere around the world and took with them their Methodist faith and started Methodist societies. The first society that started outside the United States was in Antigua, is an island in the Caribbean, and there was a plantation owner by the name of Nathaniel Gilbert III, and he was ill. And so he went to England and he took with him two enslaved persons, and they were resting at his brother's house just outside of England. And John Wesley came and visited and preached to them, and they were impressed. And John Wesley recorded this in his journal. And about a month later, John Wesley returned and asked them if they wanted to be baptized, and they said yes. So all three of them, Nathaniel Gilbert and these two enslaved women, were baptized, and then they returned to Antigua, and they started the first Methodist society outside of England in 1759. This is before
Wow.
Methodism existed in the American colonies, before it existed in Africa, Asia, anywhere else outside of England.
Hmm.
And they did it all on their own. They weren't
Yes.
commissioned, they weren't ordained, and they actually started an interracial Methodist society on the plantation. There were both whites and blacks,
Mm.
and they worshiped together.
That is an amazing story. I believe we actually saw one of the baptismal fonts that was sent back from Antigua while we were together in London. It was at the Wesley's Chapel there in London. A beautiful, really beautiful piece that they had there, and it's really felt so amazing to be part, have see so much history in one place around and Methodist missions and Methodist expansion and that space. And those are such really interesting stories because we often think of Methodism came to North America and it just stopped everywhere else because we're so most of my audience is U.S. based, so it'll be like we're used so much to American Methodist history, we forget that it's happening in Canada, it's happening in all over the British Isles, it's happening in the Caribbean, eventually spreading to other parts of Europe and Asia and Africa. But we get so hyper fixated on the U.S. Methodism that we forget that it is a just like U.S. we get just in history of Christianity too, but we forget that it is always spreading all over the place.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And one of the points of the book is that you don't have to wait until
Hmm.
you're ordained or commissioned or you have an official title. These people just traveled and took their faith and
Hmm.
started preaching to their friends, invited them into their living room. And
Yes.
and so Thomas Coke, he started to provide support for these, and he wanted to send missionaries. But
Hmm.
John Wesley said no at first.
Hmm.
Coke wrote out this whole plan and started raising money and got together other Methodist preachers who were volunteering to go. And Wesley found out about it and scolded Coke and said, "No, you can't do that." And we don't know what happened to that money that he had raised. But anyway, uh, uh, it wasn't until a few years later that Wesley agreed. Well, yeah, okay. He was receiving all these letters, send us a missionary, send us a pastor, that he finally relinquished and asked the annual conference, are there any volunteers willing to go? And a couple of people volunteered.
Hmm.
And so that's when the first Methodist missionaries were sent out.
That is such an important story to remind us that, and you and I are both lay people in the United Methodist. We both get accidentally ordained sometimes, I'm sure.
Yes,
But neither of us are ordained. We're both lay people following the ministries to which we are called. And I think that's a reminder for lay people who are listening to this. We are called to ministry in all sorts of ways, be it locally or globally. And to empowerment is that if you feel led, go. If you need support, ask, and we will work with you to make this work, and we will get you the education, the resourcing, and the connections you need. That's the beauty of this whole connection. I tell people I love the connectionalism because it's about moving people, money, and resources around at the will of the Spirit.
absolutely. In fact, when we join the church
Mhm.
as lay people, part
Yes.
of our vow is to witness. Right?
Yes.
So, in addition to your presence at church, in addition to your gifts, in addition to um, financial support for the church, you are to give your witness. And
Mhm.
so that's who we are as Christians. We are to witness, and that's all
Mhm.
these people did is they traveled to places like Nova Scotia, it
Mhm.
was today part of Canada. There's another story about a soldier who was stationed in Ireland, and John Wesley was known to go and preach in communities. And so we don't know exactly how or when they met, but we can place John Wesley's itineration near where this soldier, his name was Henry Ince, was stationed. And so he was converted to Methodism. And then later he was stationed in Gibraltar, in the
Mm,
southern tip of Spain.
yes.
And Gibraltar was under siege by land and by sea. The Spanish and then the French came, and there were ships down below in the harbor and by land. And so they were under this siege, and the Spanish were not letting food in or out, anything in or out of Gibraltar. And so the general asked the troops, whoever can devise us a strategy to defend us from both sides is going to get a reward of 1,000 sterling pounds. And so Henry Ince, this Methodist
Mm,
soldier, he asked for some volunteers, and he started digging a hole through the rock from one side to the other, and he put cannons that were on wheels, and he was able to wheel cannons in there, and so quickly they could go from one side of the rock to the other. Well, it turns out that Henry Ince was a Methodist layperson, what we were just talking about.
wow.
And so he started inviting soldiers to come to his barracks, and he wrote, like, there was just two or three of us, and we prayed. And then the group began to grow. And at this time, they started facing some persecution because the official church was the Church of England, and
Yes.
Methodists were seen as
Mhm.
this radical
Yes.
group. And so somebody wrote back to England and said, leave those Methodists alone. So this group began to grow to like 30 something soldiers that would meet and pray together and
Mhm.
preach. And eventually, Henry Ince, he started Sunday schools. He started societies in southern Spain. They started to go and teach the children in the countryside. And he didn't have any official support. He wasn't ordained, he wasn't commissioned, just God led him to pray with the other soldiers. And that's how Methodism
Mhm.
started in southern Spain.
Yes, and for those who don't know, around Gibraltar, it is a British enclave, or what now a UK enclave, that for some reason, throughout the complications of history, England owns the bottom tip of Spain at the narrowest point of getting through from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean. So it's a an issue of commerce and control of ports as part of that. So that would be why that there were British soldiers or English soldiers at the time in in the south of Spain defending it.
Yeah, and still to this day, it's
Yes.
it's a border. So it's very strange. You get to the southern tip
Yeah.
of Spain, and you have to go through a border, and then everyone speaks English, and you have to change your currency from the euro into the pound.
Yeah, it's one of those. Europe has a lot of these little enclaves that happen throughout, when you have thousands and thousands of years of history. Borders get wonky and everyone just deals with it.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, it's a very strategic place because it looks out over, like you said, like the mouth of the Mediterranean,
Yes.
and that's, just south of there is Morocco. So
Hmm.
militarily, it's an important point
Yes.
for the British to hold.
And it is interesting. Speaking of the Church of England being upset with Methodists, we know that Wesley worked very hard not to be considered a nonconformist. You say this in your book. So that was one of his fears about sending non-church sanctioned missionaries as well. He didn't want to get in any more trouble than he was already in.
Yeah, once you send missionaries, well, how are you going to ordain them, right? You send a
Yes.
missionary, that missionary has to baptize new
Yes.
converts. And so if you start to ordain them yourself, then you're considered nonconformist. You're basically starting your own denomination.
Hmm.
And the same thing with property.
Hmm.
You send a missionary, well, where are people going to meet? You're going to buy land, you're going to build a chapel. Well,
Hmm.
then that would be very conspicuous because how do you register that property? And so
Hmm.
I think that was part of the issue that John Wesley still considered himself part of the Church of England. And England, the Church of England already had its missionary societies.
Yes.
There was a couple. There was the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel,
Yes.
and there was another society for the promotion of Christian knowledge.
Hmm.
And Wesley had firsthand, he had a working relationship with both of those societies because when he was in Georgia, he received money to help buy books and Bibles and material to do catechism.
Yes.
So he was familiar with both of those societies. Of course, you and your audience know about the story when John Wesley was a child. his mother, Susanna,
Hmm.
was leading a society because there was a time when Samuel Wesley was in prison. And
Hmm.
so that meeting, that society meeting, was the Society for the Promotion of the Christian Gospel or Christian Knowledge.
Yes.
And so that was a chapter that Samuel Wesley started in Epworth. And so Wesley knew those societies. And I don't
Yes.
think as Methodist, he wasn't ready to start his own Methodist society yet.
Yes, and you and I have both been on Ashley Bogan's podcast, and she just has a book about Wesleyan vitality or vitality, as she says. And leading into that, Wesley submitted to be more vile, and he was skirting the edges most of his ministry of the Church of England by preaching outdoors and doing things that just were not normal for the Church of England at the time. So I can see where he still wanted something like support from the Church of England because he was not ready to, he was, an ordained clergy person, a priest in the Church of England till he died. And that was his whole thing. He's never wanted to start a new thing. He wanted to reform the church. That was he was in that line of revivalists and reformers that just wanted to make it what God wanted it to be. And he didn't want to start something new.
Yeah, and that's really the origins of the phrase, the world is my parish.
Yes.
It wasn't literally that Wesley was trying to start Methodism around the world,
Mhm.
although some people have misconstrued it as
Mhm.
such. But really, it was that Wesley wanted to do ministry in other parishes.
Yes.
And that phrase is that he was responding to a bishop
Mhm.
who was trying to handcuff Wesley. The
Mhm.
bishop was trying to say, "Hey, Mr. Wesley, stay in your parish, right? Don't come and cross over the boundaries into my parish because I have a
Mhm.
priest here, and let the priest deal with the parishioners." But Wesley's phrase is, "Well, wherever God calls me and sends me, that's where I'm going to
Yes.
preach."
And that is a very real reality. And you even see that here sometimes in churches in the US where they'll get jealous of one another and be like, are you stepping over and trying to take our members? And the answer is no, we are just doing ministry to where we are called. And that becomes an issue of are we jealous of one another? Or are we all supporting the furthering of the gospel, whether we're Methodist, Baptist, wherever?
Absolutely right.
Hmm.
So there is one chapter in the book
Hmm.
that deals with these testimonies of
Yes.
these ordinary, everyday people
Uh,
like Henry Entz, who I mentioned, like Nathaniel Gilbert. And there are many stories here in what is the United States now. And back then, it was just the American colonies,
hmm.
uh, ordinary lay people who came over on a ship and were here, and maybe they came because for financial reasons, a
Hmm.
new start on life, but they just started preaching,
Hmm.
and a society was born. And John Wesley didn't know anything about these societies. He didn't even know that they existed.
Yes.
And so what arose was this dilemma around ordination, because this new generation of American colonists were being born here, and people were dying here. People were getting married. They were having babies, but there was no one to carry out the sacraments. So
Hmm.
that was a sticky issue. Who is authorized to carry out the sacraments?
And that is a real reality we still even face today as Methodism grows and we send missionaries. As I'm a lay person, but I'm serving as the pastor of two churches, and we serve Holy Communion. We have baptisms, and I have to go and find a clergy person to do that for me. Thankfully, I'm married to a United Methodist clergy person who can come in and do baptisms and Holy Communion for me as needed. And I have other colleagues because we are a connectional system that will help me out on that in certain situations. But it's a reality that you have to deal with. Like, and how do we deal with what does it mean to have a church? What does it mean to have a society, whatever it might be, in which we may have it? Because in the reality, the church is, vast majority lay people, and yet we have authority sat in certain places. But how do we empower? And this may be a good place for us to pause and come back for a part two to talk about how do we empower laity to be in mission based on like the work in this book. So what we're going to do is take a break, and we'll see y'all in a part two.
Sounds great.